with founders, maybe in the ReFi space, I see different types of projects. Some who are saying they do regenerative finance, but they're not. They're just building another business. Or others who are saying, hey, we really want to change the world, but they're only looking at the very mushy human side of things, or going very slow. And there's missing like the bigger system thinking. So for me, it's really bringing this together and holding these both and finding out where on the spectrum you need to be at any time. Like, we are in a climate emergency, and we need to go fast and we need to go slow also. Holding that can be incredibly challenging.
Hey, what's good, ReFi Nation? John Ellison here with another episode of ReFi Podcast. In today's show, we sit down with Lena Bumke and Philip Stehlik. They are two very different people united by a shared vision of regeneration, a better future that we all know is possible but don't necessarily know how to get to. Philip is a serial entrepreneur and investor who has experience building incredibly successful and scalable companies. He's built many of them with a gentleman named Max Ament, and they're now looking at the ReFi space and beyond, investing and supporting founders, building climate solutions to not only build systems at scale, but also take care of themselves and the communities that they serve in the process. Lena works at Greatherthan, a pioneering organization looking at organizational design, systems thinking, and building better systems that work at scale. We touch on decentralized models, decision-making, governance, our relationship to money, and the experiences that we can craft to help bridge the gap between the disparate parts of society that need to work together to realize this regenerative future. Enjoy the episode. Do drop us a 5-star review if you get a chance. Be very grateful to get your feedback. Thanks so much, and let us know what you think. Hey, you guys.
Hello.
I'm like giddy with excitement to talk to you both. This feels like such a gift to be here in person in Lisbon. So thanks so much for carving time out of your day. I know there's a lot going on, but yeah, it feels really sweet to have you here. And you guys have such an interesting journey together and apart. And I'm really looking forward to kind of unpacking this idea of regeneration inside and out from all the different lenses and perspectives that both of you hold, which are very different, and yet they work together so beautifully well. And I remember one of the first experiences that you guys gathered at ReFi Lisboa, and I was like, wow, this is an art. Like, this is total magic.
It is.
So for those who don't know as much about you guys, I'd love to just start off with a bit of your personal journeys. Maybe we kick it off with you, Lena, for whatever you feel is relevant to share. And and let's enjoy the ride, and we can unpick it from there and go over to you, Philip.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for inviting us. I feel giddy with excitement too. I can feel it in my body, like lots of energy. I think I will actually start in the present and then kind of draw back to where I came from. Cool. And currently, most of my work, but not all of it, is happening with a company that is called Greatherthan. We support organizations, companies, networks with what we call new ways of working. What that means is decentralized leadership, shared decision-making, collaborative financial practices, and in the broad sense, what we call self-management and teal organizing. And generally, what that meets in me is the passion of just really understanding how we can organize well, whether that is in a big company or in community. And this is also where I kind of, like, my whole way and path towards organizational transformation and consulting was through this realization that, my goodness, the way we live doesn't work and the way we work doesn't work. And I really deeply believe that there is a different way, and especially for living together. And I realized that there was such a big gap between the aspirations that we have, especially when it comes to community building, and the reality of where even the most intelligent and motivated people fail really often. And that got me really curious in what are the tools and the practices and the foundations that we need to make that new way of living, but also that new way of working possible.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're combining all these different threads. I remember when I first discovered Frederic Laloux's work and this notion that organizational models evolve with human consciousness. and that there's this rapid evolution going on over the last 20, 30 years. We're looking at all these new systems. And, decentralization is one of several paradigms that we need to learn how to respond to and how to fit into. And yet it's hard to do well. So I know you also had, it sounded like a pretty profound kind of spiritual experience in your early 20s that gave a bit of a different perspective on career and life in general. I don't know if there's anything that you want to share there, but I'm definitely, curious.
Yeah, sure. So I just said to Philip in the car on our way here that I think I exited the classical career path before it even began, Like there was no...
What a blessing.
I guess so. In some ways, a blessing. When I was in my early 20s, after I studied, I left for what I thought was going to be a 3-month journey. And it turned out to be more like a 3-year journey. I traveled most of the time. I lived in India and in Nepal and in other places all over the world. And I had what I guess in the mainstream world you would call a spiritual awakening. I find that term a little bit like it doesn't quite fit because it's so deeply profound that it's kind of like words make it small. But what that meant was that there was a kind of a deep knowing and a sense of integrity kind of anchored inside of me so that it became impossible to just go back and do the normal thing of like getting a job and then doing the career ladder in a regular corporate. It just felt really wrong. Yeah.
Because you knew there was a deeper way of being in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, a deeper way. And also, I think that also really meant that all of the gaps that I was perceiving in the outside world got really exciting for me to understand how can we bridge them or how can we fill them. And what I was talking about earlier, those practices, those tools, really making sure that we develop them, to make that possible, not just for individual, like single people, but for really bigger groups.
At a systems level. Yeah, recognizing the interrelatedness between the journeys we make as individuals and how we show up in these organizations. Maybe we play with a similar structure for you, Philip. Drop us into where you are now and give us a backwards-looking view of kind of how you got there and anything that's relevant to share.
Now, we do things together, and maybe we go into that a little bit more around group cohesion and alternative ways of organizing as a community. But my main work, and I do it like this because if we get to the difference between work and life, once I feel aligned with something, there's actually not a lot of separation anymore. But my main work is that I work with startups and founders and founding teams, specifically who are working on climate-related problems, and specifically also use software or decentralized technologies and decentralized approaches to avert the climate crisis that we're in right now. Yeah. And I do this together with my dear friend of 20 years and co-founders of many companies, Max, who you also know. And we really looked at our experience as founders, as technologists, as also investors, and how do we put that to the best use at this critical time of our planet. And there we found all these amazing founders and founding teams who want to really change the world, but often they lack the experience or the tools or the capital on a very practical level. So we provide that and we help them there. Yeah. And then also there's a deeper pieces for me. How do we have personal transformation baked into these new technology systems that we're building? And kind of how do we enable the founders there to really take care of themselves while they take care of the planet? Because my experience...
Is it possible?
Yes, but is it like, maybe that speaks to my experience and how I got here is that like in my teenage years, I was a computer nerd. Like I would carry my big, back then, like CRT monitor, right, the big ones, to my friends' houses on the weekends, and we'd hang out and do nerdy things. Yeah. And straight out of high school, I started working at a company actually that Max founded. We built financial software for large enterprises, like for the largest companies of this world, basically. Wow. And through that, I ended up in Silicon Valley. I was 21. I moved to San Francisco. Had no idea what Silicon Valley was, and kind of got sucked into the Silicon Valley dream of building bigger, faster, more. And we did that quite successfully.
Yeah.
We started a company. We started multiple companies there, but one in particular that then grew and to $1 billion business.
Wow.
Got acquired later on. But in the Silicon Valley kind of slipstream, or in the Silicon Valley ethos, I really found out that I was burning out.
Yeah.
I was just not creating for the creation's sake anymore, but for the creating for faster, bigger, more money, etc. And I took a step back from there. Left that company like in 2016, and took a break and really did like the inner work and looked inside, like, what am I gonna do? And I found something called Ethereum in 2016-17, the promise of a new financial system.
Yeah.
And I went really in there and said, okay, if we want these new systems, these new financial systems, how would they look like? What would we build them as? And again, with Max and some others, we built a product called Centrifuge, where we combined the real world with blockchain world. And quickly there, I also found that a lot of the DeFi or a lot of crypto stuff was, again, not really doing the new thing, was perpetuating old patterns very often. Of course, there's some really amazing projects, but the vast majority was actually doing the same stuff, just again on a different technology. Yeah. And I burned out again, like twice, and just said, fuck it all. Like, I leave tech, I leave crypto, and I don't know if I'm gonna ever go near technology again. And then slowly, after some recovery and like really deep look inside, came back together with Max and really we said, okay, how would we do this differently? How would we enable founders to really do something different? And still using our enterprise, fintech, crypto experience and the successes that we had and the capital that we have, but really enabling them to build really something in service. And so that's what I'm doing now. And so my story kind of, I learned a bunch of the old school stuff and then kind of had to unlearn it and come back to it from a very different place now.
Yeah, and I think this is so incredibly resonant for me because I obviously had a little bit of experience in the Bay, working remotely and traveling back and forth. There is this incredible critical mass of experience and, technology and know-how. And yet the fervor and pace at which it's being dedicated towards really quite singular monetary goals is highly extractive in the end for almost all participants involved, except for sometimes the shareholders who make large upsides. But it's this interesting thing that I've really struggled with in ReFi as well. It's like regenerative finance surely should espouse to build regenerative systems. And if we're not building regenerative systems as an organization, then how is this actually going to affect the products that we make, the way that we engage with our customers or with our partners? And I'd be curious to get your perspective and take on this, Lena, because for me, it feels really difficult to actually build regenerative organizational systems. And I don't know where this comes from. Is it just like a lack of education? Is it a cultural thing? Like, what's your read on the kind of systemic hurdles to people actually building systems that work for people at work?
I mean, the first thing I want to say is it is really difficult.
Yeah.
Like, it's not an easy thing at all. And I am in no position of holding all the answers. I think this is a continuous exploration and it requires a lot of willingness and experimentation as well to actually discover what works. And also what works for one organization and company or project doesn't work for the other because there are so many individual aspects to consider. So maybe that as a preface. And then, I think there is a big societal load that we all carry and that's maybe where the blessing part comes in of having never really entered that like business as usual. True. Because what I can see is that I have much less to unlearn when I'm moving in, for example, a self-organized system. Like this idea of having agency and being able to just pick up things and lead where I can lead, but also follow where I want to follow and where it feels like the right way to follow because somebody else actually leads. That feels relatively organic for me. Whereby, especially if you've worked in a hierarchical system, you're so used to somebody else both holding the responsibility at the end of the day, but also the authority. So there is a constant waiting for approval. And like a lot of the ways that we, for example, make decisions within Greatherthan, for example, is through advice. And you actually do not wait for anybody's approval ever. You just gather the relevant information for all the parts that are involved, either because they're affected by your decision or because they hold relevant expertise. But the whole process is so different. And even I, with like much less unlearning, and see, this is where I think all this, like all the baggage from how we're being parented, how we're being schooled comes in, because we're constantly waiting and we're constantly being told what to do as a child. Like, this is the task, this is how you do it. And rarely ever are we invited to actually find out ourselves, you know, with the support of others.
Totally. And how it actually feels, you know, this kind of inner world. I love the word interoception that I've picked up on recently, this kind of ability to experience the world going on within. It's a skill that's almost actively suppressed in, you know, the traditional parenting models and education models. And so we end up, you know, doing things that are just not good for us. And, you know, it has this, for me, this experience of just bottoming out, you know, like really removing the reservoirs of energy. And it's tough to sort of take the time out of, you know, the treadmill. And I'm really curious some of the insights that you gained, Philip, as you broke free from these systems, because it's easy to just stay trapped and said, hey, you know what, I'm going to take some time. I'm going to take some space. Because I know you leaned quite deeply into community. I believe this is kind of part of the story of how you guys met. And just, yeah, what kind of gems did you find as you stepped out of, you know, the startup space and looked deeper?
I think one key gem is that it's a paradox in a way. There's a lot of paradoxes because having been in Silicon Valley and having done the ride and the crypto ride and having really created in there, I can really appreciate the pace of getting towards a solution and the systemic approach to create something from nothing. And it's really beautiful. And at the same time, if it's not paired with the other side of the paradox of, wow, as you said, like, who am I listening on the inside? Who are we together actually, and not just who we think we should be in the light of some company or some system or whatever. If we don't hold that side of the paradox also, then you might go to a burnout or whatever you might end up. And so this is also something when I work with founders, maybe in the ReFi space, I see different types of projects. Some who are saying they do regenerative finance, but they're not. They're just building another business, and which is also fine. But they use the word. Or others who are saying, "Hey, we really want to change the world," but they're not actually. They're only looking at the very mushy human side of things, or going very slow, and there's missing like the bigger system thinking. So for me, it's really bringing this together and holding these both and finding out where on the spectrum you need to be at any time, because we are in a climate emergency, and we need to go fast, and at the same time, I'm getting goosebumps, and we need to go slow also. And so holding that can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, it's something that I've lived with for many, many days, this sense of urgency. I remember picking up David Wallace Wells' The Uninhabitable Earth in the airport just by chance, reading it cover to cover as a new father. And it was just this propulsion of self into whatever I could possibly do to make a difference in this thing, because it's so massive and it's so urgent. And yet actually, the timescales that we're looking at, this is a multi-decade approach, and so therefore we have to approach these things in ways that we as individuals can sustain. And I don't know how you guys have found it, but I think the pandemic in particular really illustrated some very core truths about what it means to be human in terms of our relationships with one another, and how much we need deep, grounded experiences with other people who know us and who actually can care for us. And I'd be curious, whoever this speaks to most, like how you see community fitting into these systems that we're trying to build, these startups, these organizations, both in life and work, because it feels like community is this kind of central piece of the puzzle.
Can I add one other thing before we go into that question? just when you're speaking about that urgency, and I feel it myself, I feel it within our organization, like it happens so often, this I call it a perceived urgency, because even if there is a real urgency, there is an urgency that I think happens on a bodily level that's mostly what we feel as activation, like maybe even nervous system activation. And I was thinking that I actually think the best work doesn't come from that place. The best work, even if that means I'm taking 5 minutes more to ground myself, like we did before we started this podcast, then there's a very different quality of work that happens, and it might be much more efficient and effective than coming from this place of like rushing and maybe even frantic, like doing.
Totally.
So I just want to emphasize this, and this also really speaks to me, to this deep connection to the body that we need to rebuild so that we are able to listen and to be aware when we're out of that state of grounded alignment, so we can come back to it to do the work we got to do well.
Yeah, beautiful. Because at the end of the day, it's a neurochemical cocktail. It's cortisol, it's, adrenaline. And yes, there's that urgency, and it gives you sometimes that ability to change direction or to make a tough decision, but it's not the energy that can really sustain the contribution over a long period of time. But yeah, I'd be curious leaning into the community piece, because I think this was when we were hanging out in East Denver. I was just kind of, shocked and blown away and surprised like how much of our overlap there is, because I've experimented with living in community for many, many years, and they're not, I don't see that many people who are actually on the frontier of tech and entrepreneurship and finance who are actually leaning into that stuff. So I'm curious, like, what initially drew you into living with other people and alternative ways of being on land, and where that came from.
You said something, it's a multi-decade problem earlier.
Yeah.
And that's also how I see more and more. At first I intuited it, I had intuition, but I think it lands more and more that also this community thing is a multi-decade thing. I hope that the people who I'm collaborating with today, either professionally or also communally, that we will, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we build a stronger web of trust, that we can actually create something that lasts, and that is more than just each individual of us. And so that's just my assumption more and more when I start building relationships. Okay, how would I be with you if we're actually going to be working together for 50 years, or in our orbit for the next 50 years? Yeah, I mean, I'm 38, so 50 years is not unreasonable for me.
Totally. And you've illustrated with Max. I mean, you guys have been working together for literally decades.
Exactly. We've been working together for 20 years, and there's a whole different way of being and understanding and creating. So that's just something I'm realizing more and more now. And but also what drew me to it, and more on the communal living, less the network of companies and startups, which is also a community, but the communal living is this thing of what does togetherness actually mean? Finding more and more that just having one or two people I'm relating with, that could be a friend or could be a partner, that's of course not fulfilling all the personal needs and also the communal needs of each other. So really having a web of people where I can lean on, could be emotionally, could be practically, could be a circle of men or brothers where with a very different dynamic, and really having these support structures then allows individually us to be more ourselves and to see each other, and it can go even more and more. But that was my starting point. Also coming out of the startup world where, sure, we're doing something together, but often it's quite individualistic. And you said earlier, the power structure, the hierarchy is I'm doing this or we're doing this. And finding the balance to that. And today that's a big part of my life, of being together, creating together, and then also bringing founders together or whatever. It is just a sense of it's a bigger boat.
Yeah, and for me, it's been a transition because it's a very different way of being in that we have such a short attention span and we've got so many kind of modes of stimulus all around us that actually to properly engage at, a multi-personal level over a long period of time, it really does require a different type of attention and a different type of presence. And I think in particular, one of the things that's been very interesting to me is just how trauma and wounds and emotional needs, met or unmet, really influence the way that people show up. And oftentimes deal with conflict or not, because at the end of the day, conflict really is kind of the key thing. And so I'm curious, like, what your take is on this in terms of how organizations are dealing with people's wounds and trauma, because we're into an increasingly volatile world where trauma is going to just be a part of our life.
And also, just before you go, and different traumas come up in different situations and in different relationships.
Yes.
Like, so it's something where we might be totally cool, and then somebody else walk in and is like, what's happening? So this is super interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, multiple things. There's so much I want to actually add to what you just started.
Keep rolling. Let's go.
Let's see. I think one of the pieces of the shared vision that Philip and I hold is that it's not just communal living, but that there is also something where a very meaningful collaboration can grow out of living together. And it doesn't necessarily mean that all the people need to work on the same thing together, but this sense that, like, what is a meaningful collaboration? I think it's partially what you described, this like long-term vision or the experience that you already had. And I think that a key piece of it is what I would call deep relationships. And deep relationships, they require us knowing each other on a different level. And maybe that's where I can also tie it into the conflict piece. But for sure, they require being together in person. Like, there is no way around that. And sometimes that means living together. Sometimes that just means that you have places where you can gather, where you might even be able to return to, so that you can also not just build a relationship to each other, but to also places over time.
Yes.
I think there's a preciousness there, instead of just like constantly jumping to different places all over the world. But the sense of like actually returning, I think that's super special. And we need those places where we can do that. And an interesting polarity that I often see is that, what you said earlier, of like, there are the people who are entrepreneurial and in business and wanting to like change the world on a big system scale, and then there are communal living projects, and often they really lack that. They hold a lot of other wisdom, especially on a relational level, on a conflict resolution level. But something I really care about, and I think what we care about together as well, is how to bring them together. And really, it feels like there's so much potential there. And maybe this is also where it comes to this whole question around conflict and trauma. I mean, within Greatherthan, for example, we teach a course that's called Trauma-Informed Collaboration. Wow, so there is a whole educational effort to actually create a shared awareness of what trauma can look like, how it can play out, and how we can meet it within each other. Just knowing that it comes up at work, whether you want it or not. Like, work is not an emotion-free space, even if we sometimes pretend it is. And I don't think it should be,
Yeah.
And so I think the first step is just having a shared awareness and education. And then I think there is this really big piece, like, if you want to do organizational transformation, you need personal transformation. Yes. And you need a huge level of self-responsibility. Because if you actually want to be an agent in a system, you need to be able to be responsible and also take responsibility for what your choices are, what your actions are. And it's a fact that a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people actually like that somebody else is responsible. Yeah. It's
way easier.
Exactly.
It's not my problem.
It's comfortable.
Not my job.
But it's also kind of debilitating because it means that if somebody else is responsible, I don't have agency. So I do think that there's a huge level of work that we need to do on ourselves to be able to deal with our traumas, to deal with our emotions in a web of support with others around who know us, who can support us in that. Because it's not a individual, like, that's the other, like, the shadow side of self-responsibility. It's like, I'm going to do it all on my own and I don't need anybody, right?
Sure.
But it's not that either. So it's this, like, both end of doing the work and doing it together.
And this is beautiful because there's this other paradox, like doing the self-work and doing the work, and there's some places where it's just around this, but it's also a never-ending spiral. Like, you can just do that. And then how do we put this in the larger context of where the planet is at this time? And we do this to do systems change or to really work on climate and impact related projects. And so, again, bringing these two paradoxes together and letting them really support each other, I think that's where the magic then really comes.
Oh, man, I love it. This is why I vibe with you so much, Philip, because this is my thing, is we need to do the work in ourselves, on our own, and in community. And we also have to work towards building systems that are radically different than the systems today. And I think it's that invitation really to go deeper into both, because I feel as though kind of both sets of communities archetypally, whether you're a systems builder or, an on the ground, they haven't quite seen the bridge between the two. And that's, I think, what is so interesting and inspiring around some of the experiences that you guys host and just the way that you bring people together and the different types of people that are coming together. Because it feels like we can't build this new world without the types of incredibly talented, driven, engineering, brilliant systems thinkers, as well as the, emotionally connected, people relators who know what it's actually like to do the work on the ground. But I don't know, it seems like there's a lot of resistance between bringing these groups together. I'm not sure what you guys have found in terms of,
I think it really depends on who you speak to. I think there is resistance in a big part of the world. And for me, that's also not the fight I want to fight, to go and convince somebody of something that they have no access to. And at the same time, I have experienced, and also we organized events and gatherings, last weekend in Madrid, actually, at Max's house. We brought together founders, researchers, some coaches, really from a broad spectrum, but they all came because they knew they have a shared vision for the world. They used different tools to get there, but it was clear that it's interdisciplinary, but there's a shared, or at least an opening towards doing this together. And I think that's the magic, where if there's an opening, then these bridges are there. There are other people who are really working on the bridge building when there is just really hard fronts that are not seeing each other. That's not my work. I think there's beautiful people who do that. But for me, creating these cross-functional, interdisciplinary spaces works pretty well, at least from our experience.
Yeah, I was also thinking, I think there is also you said, who are you inviting? And I think there is also a question of how are you inviting them? And I even heard it in the way that you use language. I think we polarize a lot with our language.
Yeah, totally.
Of what if they are actually emotionally intelligent system thinkers and they're on the same thing just switched around. So, and I think that works really well with what you started speaking about of highlighting that even if we have a different language and even if we work with very different people, there is a shared vision and a shared intention to create a future that is somehow worth living for. And if we recognize that, then it becomes much, I'm not saying it's easy, but it becomes much easier to bridge those gaps and to meet each other. And this is maybe the third point of not just how do you invite them, but how do you actually facilitate the space? Because if we just start on an intellectual level, that will probably be a mess because we use different language, because we're passionate about different things, because we have different worldviews really often. But I think if we're able to connect on the human level, from the heart and with our emotionality, that is somewhat universal, there's this need for love and this need for connection that we basically all have. And if we meet there, then all the stuff can kind of drop a little bit. All the stuff where we might have friction or we might not understand. And there's a whole other kind of well of compassion and understanding that we can draw from.
I want to add something to this, because even now as we're speaking, using language of meeting in the heart and a lot of love. For some people, they're meeting in the heart, what the fuck are you talking about? But in the end, they're also human. So I think even there, with the invitation and the way we facilitate spaces, is really let's just go into it without too much talking about it, without using language. I mean, we use, of course, some language, but finding really the universal connector point that these people can meet, and then kind of cruising through there.
And doing that through creating shared experiences rather than trying to create a shared lingo.
The shared lingo kind of comes after.
Yeah.
I think we can start meeting on the consciousness, like talking. Let's find the right terms, without actually having really connected here.
Yeah.
And so, from my side, it's almost flipping this around, meeting first. Yeah. And then let's build on that.
I feel like there's so much opportunity for this because I don't know about you guys, but I find so many of the ways that people gather quite frustrating and dissatisfying. Like the ReFi space seems to be locked into this conference circuit and it's the same stuff being talked about by the same people on a different stage to the same audience. And I can't do it. It literally drives me nuts. And it's like, what's going on here? There's so much capital, financial and human going into these experiences, but it just doesn't seem like it's going anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so this is touching a bell for you.
So this is also something I found in 2017, 18 in the crypto space. Yeah. It was just looping in itself so much. Yeah. And back then we always said, let's connect this to the real world, outside of crypto. And people were laughing at us, that's way too difficult, the centrifuge. And now in the ReFi space, I kind of see a reincarnation of this. Like you said, it's the same people talking about the same data. And there's okay, let's build products that actually large corporates would use to really change the way how they manage their supply chain, whatever, carbon accounting, whatever it is. But it's almost a skill set that people don't have yet in this ecosystem. Agreed. So much, very few. So that is popping out of the bubble is one. And then maybe they don't know different ways of gathering. Yeah. There's just the very fast-paced conferences with a lot of talks, a lot of input without actually time to digest. So these are the two kind of bubble poppers I like to see.
Yeah, I think there is something huge what you just said. Maybe they don't know a different way of gathering. But even if they knew a different way of gathering, I think, in psychology, there's something that we call scripts. So people, for a situation, assume a kind of particular way of behaving in a social way. Yeah. Yeah. And if I go into a restaurant, I will behave differently than if I'm in my own living room. And so I think we have really strong concepts of what a conference should look like and how I am supposed to be in such a space. And even if I may be a liberated communal being in other spaces, it can be super difficult to bring that if I sense or I assume that there is a different way of relating in such a space. And I think to really crack that, we need to bring people in that hold different, onto the stages and into the spaces in between that facilitate something else. And we need to do that intentionally because as soon as we do that, the people around will realize, I can be different here if I want to. And I can speak out different invitations and I can have different conversations. I can ask different questions and I can meet you on a different level. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the bubble bursting is very much that. It's a bubble when everyone knows each other and it's a safe space because there isn't anything being introduced that's outside of that container. And it's a really deep yearning for me to see, just people of all walks of life looking at this story of regeneration and seeing Web3 as a tool and an enabler amongst a bunch of other tools that can make this future possible. But it's quite a tough time at the moment in this space. I'm curious to get your read on ReFi and the regenerative movement more broadly. It's obviously my first full cycle. You've obviously seen a few of these, but what's your take on kind of the state of ReFi today and where we're at and what's going to actually take us through to, the next cycle?
I think, first of all, I love what you said in the beginning. Web3 or decentralization is one tool of many. Yeah. Especially in the crypto space, or I heard decentralize everything.
Yeah, can't do that.
It's really everything, tokenize everything, really everything. And so just realizing this is one tool in the toolset that we have, tokenization, alternative financial incentive models, etc., etc. And so one thing, in my opinion, that gets us through the cycle is actually realizing we're one tool in the broader scheme, and then connecting it to the other tools that are out there. It might be hardware things, it might be whatever it is. Like I mentioned, corporations and so on. Right now, I think we're still in crypto winter. I think also globally, financially, we're not in the best flow state. So capital is not flowing as much as a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So it's slow, and many people say you're building in winter, and it's like, I think you should build always.
Yeah.
But especially now.
But if you don't have any money.
Yeah, if you don't have any money, I think there is funding happening for projects who are really solving real problems and who have some traction.
Yeah.
And it's just the fact, if you don't have any traction today, like right now, you just be prepared for another, I don't know how long, 6, 9, 12 months of really, really slow time. So preserving capital, going slow, focusing on the essentials, etc., etc. I think there's, as you said, there is a cycle, so the cycle will pick up again. Don't know when, but also it also forced us, like Max and I, with Earth, supporting founders, investing in founders, really to rethink like what is actually up right now.
Yeah.
Like if capital is not flowing so much, how can we support founders maybe with smaller checks, or how can we connect them to other projects that are a little bit further to join forces, or whatever it is. Like I think it's just being aware of the times that we're in, and using what we have to the best benefit. But that's just a high level. We can go deeper into the different type of projects that are happening, but totally. I think I just leave it there.
Yeah, and I think there's also this systemic shift more broadly, and like the EBF framework, I think, is one interesting example, as people are moving away from sort of carbon tunnel vision into a broader set of ecological benefits, that our awareness is expanding, and that these cycles of contraction and expansion sort of enable some type of conscious evolution to take place. I'd be curious, Lena, to hear what you're most excited about and all the organizations that you're touching base with, because it seems like Greatherthan has a very interesting reach across lots and lots of different groups. And I don't know if there's any specific trends or projects or case studies that are just lighting a fire in you, but love to open the view a little bit.
I mean, I can't really point to a case study, but I think the piece that I'm most excited about, mainly because I feel it's the area of most untapped potential, is really rethinking and rebuilding the way we relate to money. And not just kind of like we're in a place now where we can suddenly build new financial systems on chain. I mean, that's revolutionary. I think that basically changed our world. And we will just continue to replicate what we know on there if we do not change something within and change our deeply conditioned relationships to money, the stories that we hold that are both very similar but also very individual at the same time. And I mean, this has many levels, I would say. I think there are some things that you can already start doing today, like everyone, basically, whether you're an individual or within your team. I think it has a lot to do with, like, money is such an unspoken topic. And especially in organizations, depending on how you're structured, only very few people have actually access to all the financial information.
Right, yeah.
And if only very few people have access, then how are you supposed to do any sort of collaborative financial decision making? It's impossible. Yeah. So I think there's a level of kind of openness and transparency that also needs practice, and that needs, like, it starts by asking each other questions. Maybe it starts with asking your friends questions and starting to talk about money and asking yourself, wait, how did I learn about money? What does money actually mean to me? Because, what I see really often is that money is a placeholder for so many other things, of like self-worth or a sense of achievement or safety or freedom. Like, there are so many that you could replace them with. And so I think this is the kind of the individual money work that is a part of that. But by doing that, we create more capacity to switching or like experimenting with alternative ways of doing money collaboratively, whether that is how you set your salaries, how you distribute funds within the organizations, for example, surplus profit. How do you do budgeting? All of that. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I could go into detail, and that could take up probably 2 podcast episodes. So I'm not going to do that.
Well, you should come back. Because I think
let's talk about money. Yeah, we love money stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's not everything, but like money is, the primary coordination vehicle of our entire society. And yet I feel as though most people have some pretty odd beliefs around money and what it means to have money. And it's like, actually, the evidence is pretty clear. Beyond a certain income threshold, money doesn't make you happier. And we often sacrifice money at the expense of time in nature or time with people. And it's been quite a emotive journey for me, working with money as somebody who grew up in a place with every material need met in suburban America, and yet underneath, people are really suffering. There was a absolute wave of suicide in our community, and you look around, it's like, what are the actual challenges that people are facing, if not the depravity born of having all of your material needs met, but being empty in relationship. And I don't know what your kind of money epiphanies were along the way, Philip, but it seems like you have a really different relationship to money than a lot of the people I've seen in the startup space who've, done well and managed to go through exits. And I don't know, like, was there a particular moment that things shifted for you where you started looking at it differently? Or like, how's your relationship with money evolved?
So I grew up lower middle class in Germany. We didn't have much money. Like, I never grew hungry, but there was definitely, money was not abundant. And somehow, I don't know exactly how, but I always trusted that money came through my work. And also when I started in San Francisco, it was not really about making a lot of money. It was about building something really cool. Then, of course, money came in. We raised the first millions, the next tens of millions, and like whatever. I think in total, like, we raised something like 300 million for our different projects. And so money became like a driving force for us as a business. But I didn't really have myself an abundance of money until a few years ago, when the first exit started to happen. And there, I would say my relationship with money changed as I had more than enough. I really had to think about, okay, how do I hold this money? How do I flow this money? I sense, for me, there's also responsibility with this cash that I have, or that I have access to myself, or through other, like, fellow angel investors or fellow VCs. I think this is also my personal money, and the money that I have access to bring to projects that are actually doing something meaningful. I'm going to go really personal here. I think there's a moment when you go from having very little money to some money, like the basic needs met. I was happy that I was there for a while, but then to having much more, where I had to really hold that energy in a way. Like, I had no idea, what do you do with all of this? Like, how do you, wow, I'm afraid of this. I don't want to touch it. Like you said, like the placeholder for money. This is too much responsibility. I don't want it. And really had to grow into this and settle into it in a way. And now it's mostly about, taking care of me, taking care of my loved ones around my community, and collaborating there, but also flowing it to the right places. So there's also something in me, when I look at other people who work in regeneration or community, where money is actually a bad thing, or you don't want money. I believe it is a really creative force, and it is something that you can direct. And I'm happy to make more money to flow it again to amazing places in the world that then can spark positive change. Like, that's how I look at it. And I'm facing a lot of stuff in that also. Like, our money work together, like really looking deeply inside. That I would say.
And I think there's this interesting phenomena that happens, what you described around this being a responsibility that almost allows you to grow your sense of purpose and even your sense of self through your extension of relationships. That it's like, I can be a vessel and a container for this resource. And through my attention and my connections, this can flow towards places of beauty and great transformation in the world. And I think really this is what I would hope that we can see in this next season ahead, that as capital, flows in greater volumes, that people who are stewarding it can really see this as an incredible responsibility. Because for me, money really is for, those who are suffering, and the soil which is being, ravaged by pretty horrible farming practices, and the water and the air actively being polluted. It's like we have this incredible technology through money. And we've tried to make it use for, inflating the sense of self and ego through wealth accumulation, and look where it's got us. So like, what if we redirected this into a totally different story? I'm excited, and yet there's just there's so much to unpack. Go for it.
I've just one more small addition, because I was at an event not so long ago, and then we had a VC panel. I was sitting on the VC panel, and then we had a panel that was really going deep into anti-capitalist things and so on. And again, these paradoxes, and I think we also have to hold both, because, for example, VC for profit is a really good way to scale projects fast. Like, we have proof from Silicon Valley, Totally. And at the same time, we really need to fundamentally rethink how we do it. And I think there's like a stacking and a step-by-step. I just wanted to throw that in with another one of these.
Yeah, totally. And I'm curious how you've managed to hold that tension, because it feels like there's so many different vectors.
And just practice all the time. Sometimes I hold it better, sometimes worse. I think it's just being aware.
But I mean, at the end of the day, like, you have, say venture capital as a model with LP and the agreements that stipulate a particular magnitude of return over a particular horizon. Like, is the traditional VC model actually fit for, the age in which we need to realize, which is regeneration over a multi-decade horizon? I don't know what your take is on this. But
my take is that it's not the only answer. I think if I think about VC and also talk with some other friends who do climate VC, where we say, let's use these tools that we have today to push forward like biodiversity initiatives or carbon whatever, or like really pushing them forward fast, because we need it fast. And at the same time, I think we need philanthropic capital, we need states funding, like we need all of these. And I think it's just one tool there. And also there, if I talk to founders or to friends who are building new projects, I'm really sitting with them and saying, what type of capital do you actually want to take on? Because
100%.
It comes with this, like, VC capital. You need to, in their fund creation, you invest in so many projects. Each of them must have the chance to go 100x. So it's a certain kind of contract that you sign with VC. And maybe that's actually not the right capital for a lot of these projects. Maybe you go slower but deeper, or like whatever it is. There's just being differentiated in the decisions that you make.
And being, I guess, clear about the color of money and the way that it comes in and what it's expecting of you. And I guess this is all just kind of that rising awareness around money and the different flavors and how it can be used for the service of this more beautiful world. I'm conscious we're coming towards the top of the hour here. I don't know if there's, anything that we didn't touch on that you guys want to explore. It feels like we've, woven in between both of your stories and interests quite a bit, but there's almost limitless depth that we could dive into. Is there anything that's burning for either of you that you guys want to peel open before we wrap up?
I would love to add one thing that I think connects to a lot of what both of you said in the last kind of 6 minutes. And that is this idea what wealth actually is. You said all material needs were met where you grew up, and still people killed themselves. And I think that there is something about, like, wealth is simply not just financial capital. There's so many other aspects to it. It's the, like, well-being of my body, like health. It's the well-being of my relationships. It's my environment, like my natural environment that I'm in, whether that has a good quality of air or water, whether it's polluted or not. So I feel like there's so many different aspects of wealth, and collectively, and especially in a system like capitalism, we simply do not hold these different aspects of wealth. And that means that we're not incentivizing working towards having them holistically fulfilled, but we're only filling one bucket. And that might be overflowing and the other stays so empty. And we see what that leads to.
For me, I'm coming to this word wholeness a lot, or wholesome, but not like a wholesome meal, but just including all the parts. And I've seen just how much deeper and how much with much more energy I can come and the people around me if we take in all the parts. Like we talked about the personal and the systemic. We talked about like grounding each other to go fast. And so this is something I'm really want to foster in our community here, just as people, but also in the ReFi or the tech community. Like how can we really build from this place? And this is just an invitation I put out to founders always, like, okay, let's drop a level deeper so that we can go further and higher. So just really, it's a lot of work, and I think it pays off so tremendously, so that in 10, 20, 50 years, we're still here all feeling fulfilled and happy and can sit around the dinner table together or meet at an event and really say, wow, like we did really good.
Yeah, I love this. I love this long-term thinking. And I think we need more wisdom and elders who can help to inspire that type of, forward-looking view, and to have the relationships that say, look, this is possible, and this is the kind of fruit that can be born through really taking this over, a many year time horizon. I'd be curious to keep thinking of kind of just like early stage founders who are inspired by this new story. I don't know if either of you have any advice, but what would it be if you saw like some burning passion in a young entrepreneur who wants to build a system that can change the world, yet also take care of themselves in the process?
This fits exactly into what I was just kind of pondering about. And I think there's something about, in the face of such great challenges, sometimes it can feel so daunting, I think this is the right English word, to create the change that is needed, towards a better world, to create different systems. And then we tend to do just nothing because we feel like we can't do everything all at once. And I think even if you still do like 90% business as usual, like recognizing where you do have capacity to do something else, and then to experiment. I think this like grounding things in practice rather than theorizing, like continue to theorize, just understanding, okay, this is a value I have, like maybe it is more collaborative decision making, whatever it is, but taking this value and trying to understand within my capacity, what is an experiment that I can design today for the next 3 months, and then continue to iterate, and maybe and likely the capacity will grow to hold these kind of things. And so I don't think it's about changing it all today and doing it from like day one all differently, because that might actually not be possible or feasible or effective. But doing it like incrementally and really recognizing where that is possible to create that change, and taking it playfully and with curiosity. Because like if systems change isn't fun, then it's probably also not sustainable.
I love this. So good. That's the kind of world I want to live in. What about you, man?
The young founders who are really thriving towards something else. I'm just put myself just like in my head. I went 20 years back, not so much on the regen side, but then. And one thing I would really try to bring close to them is find people who are already living this future or acting in this way, the future of that you want to create, maybe in different pockets of your own world, because they can be inspiration, they can be an anchor also to continue to look at, and then also find ways, find people who root for you, and also listen to people who made the same mistake multiple times. Like as a young founder, just I know everything. Of course I'm going to get this done, but just putting myself again in my early 20s. And I think we need this attitude to really bring forth something new and kind of get through this crack in the world that we're seeing today. But at the same time, really taking in advice or being coachable by folks who've been there. Will save a lot of headache, and like somebody else banged their head against the wall 10 times. Like just it will be easy.
And I wish I would have been hanging out with Philip when I was in my early 20s. There's a lot of head banging going on.
I've been there.
I think we've all been there. It's part of the process. Oh man. Well, thank you guys so much. It's such a pleasure. I'm curious for people listening who want to learn more about what you're doing or maybe even get involved or some of your experiences. Where can they find you, and is there anything in the horizon that people should be aware of?
For us together, I think one thing that we do is called The Future Is Now.
Yes.
So thefutureisnow.to, I think, is our website. Just we're doing experience design. We're hosting events and gatherings. We do a lot of money work. I think there's a money workshop coming up in Lisbon, actually.
Oh, cool.
25th of November.
I see.
Hey, it's almost my birthday. Maybe I'll do a birthday workshop.
So that is one. And then for me, you find me at pstehlik, like on Twitter, on wherever, or pstehlik.com is my personal site. And then together with Max, I'm working on Earth.
Check it out. Amazing.
Yeah.
And how about you, Lena?
So I think if you want to know more about Greatherthan, you can just check out greatherthan.works. And I highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in new ways of organizing. We have a handbook that basically outlines almost everything about the way we're structured and organized.
So cool.
And I remember when I read it, I was like, just like my mind exploded. I was like, oh my God, this exists.
So cool.
So
I'll definitely get that in the show notes.
No matter whether you want to get involved or not, I think reading this can be super inspirational. And I guess Philip and I will continue hosting all different kinds of experiences.
And we have actually the Future Is Now gathering somewhere in spring. We don't have a venue yet, so we don't have the exact date yet.
But spring 2024.
Yeah.
And if you're
up for creating a future worth living for,
let's
no
do
matter
it.
in which bubble.
All the bubbles. Amazing.
All the bubbles.
Thank you guys so much. It's an honor, and hopefully we can have more conversations in the future now that we're all here together. A real gift, and if you guys have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I would be so incredibly grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. This helps us reach more listeners, attract amazing guests, and ultimately get the story of Regeneration out to a wider audience. It takes just a couple seconds and makes a massive difference. Thanks so much, and do let us know if there's any guests that you'd love to hear from. We'd be very grateful to hear from you. Thanks.